Hello family, welcome to our channel. In July 1943, the largest tank battle in history unfolded on the plains of Western Russia. Over 6,000 tanks, 2 million men and thousands of aircraft clashed in a brutal confrontation that would decide the fate of the Eastern Front. This was the Battle of Kursk, a turning point in World War II and a crushing blow to Nazi Germany's ambitions in the East. Before we start, please take a few seconds and subscribe to this channel for more of global insights. After the devastating loss at Stalingrad in early 1943, Hitler knew he had to regain the initiative. The Soviet Red Army had pushed the Germans back, but a bulge in the front line near the city of Kursk created an opportunity. Hitler planned a massive pincer movement, Operation Citadel, to cut off and destroy the Soviet forces within the salient, but the Soviets knew it was coming. Thanks to British intelligence intercepts and their own reconnaissance, Stalin and his top generals, especially Georgy Zhukov, had time to prepare a massive defensive network. Germany's plan was simple. Attack from the north with Field Marshal Walter Model's Ninth Army, and from the south with Field Marshal Manstein's Army Group South. They would meet near Kursk, encircle Soviet forces and annihilate them. But the Soviets had constructed defences in depth, mines, anti-tank ditches, trenches and artillery positions, spanning over 300 kilometres. They had 1.3 million troops, over 3,600 tanks and 20,000 guns ready to defend. On July 5, 1943, Operation Citadel began. In the north, Model's forces slammed into the Soviet Central Front. But their advance quickly bogged down. Soviet General Konstantin Rokossovsky had prepared multiple defensive lines. The Germans suffered heavy losses as they crawled forward. Soviet minefields and artillery took a massive toll. By July 10th, the northern assault had stalled completely. Hitler's plan was already unraveling. In the south, Manstein's troops made more progress. The elite 2nd SS Panzer Corps broke through the first Soviet lines, but the Red Army had something ready, the 5th Guards Tank Army under General Pavel Rotmistrov. On July 12th, at Prokhorovka, one of the largest and most ferocious tank battles in history erupted. Over 1,000 tanks clashed at close range. The battlefield was so cramped that tanks rammed each other, some even fought hand-to-hand. The Germans fielded advanced Tiger tanks, but Soviet T-34S were faster and more numerous. Though the Soviets suffered heavy losses, they managed to halt the German advance. The initial German assaults were met with fierce resistance. The Soviet defences, meticulously prepared, proved to be a formidable obstacle. German units found themselves bogged down in heavily mined areas, under constant artillery bombardment, and facing well-coordinated Soviet infantry and tank counterattacks. In the northern sector, Model's forces struggled to make significant progress. The Ninth Army encountered extensive Soviet fortifications, and despite deploying some of the most advanced armoured vehicles of the time, including the Tiger tanks, the Germans found themselves unable to break through the Soviet lines. The terrain, heavily fortified and dotted with minefields, played to the Soviets' advantage. As the German tanks advanced, they were met with a storm of artillery fire and anti-tank weapons, causing significant losses. Meanwhile, in the southern sector, Manstein's 4th Panzer Army initially made more headway thanks to a more concentrated use of armoured forces and favourable terrain. The German forces managed to penetrate several of the Soviet defensive lines and appeared to be on the verge of a breakthrough. However, as they pushed deeper into the salient, the Soviet resistance stiffened. The Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, under the command of General Pavel Rotmistrov, was positioned to deliver a decisive counterattack if the Germans managed to reach the town of Prokhorovka. The Battle of Prokhorovka, which took place on July 12, 1943, became the defining moment of the entire Kursk campaign. This engagement is often remembered as the largest tank battle in history, with nearly 1,000 tanks clashing on a relatively small battlefield. The German 2nd SS Panzer Corps, led by General Paul Hauser, spearheaded the attack, aiming to deliver a knockout blow to the Soviet defences. The Germans deployed their most powerful tanks, including the formidable Tigers, in a concentrated effort to smash through the Soviet lines. However, the Soviet commanders had anticipated this move. General Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army launched a preemptive counterattack, sending waves of T-34 tanks into the fray. The Soviet tanks engaged the Germans at close range, neutralizing the technological advantages of the heavier German armor. The battle was chaotic and brutal, with tanks engaging in close-quarters combat, often at point-blank range. The battlefield was soon littered with the wreckage of destroyed tanks, both German and Soviet. Despite the German numerical and technological superiority, the Soviet forces managed to hold their ground. The ferocity of the Soviet resistance and the determination of the Soviet tank crews prevented the Germans from achieving their objectives. By the end of the day, the German advance had been effectively halted. The Germans had suffered significant losses in men and material, and the initiative began to slip away from them. As the battle continued into mid-July, it became increasingly clear that the German offensive was losing momentum. The Soviets, having absorbed the initial German attacks, began to prepare for their counteroffensive. On July 12, 1943, the same day as the Battle of Prokhorovka, the Soviets launched Operation Kutuzov in the northern sector of the front. This operation aimed to drive the Germans out of the Orel salient, a key position that the Germans had held since their advance in 1941. The Soviet forces, spearheaded by the Western Front and Bryansk Front, launched a series of coordinated attacks that caught the Germans off guard. The Soviet counteroffensive quickly gained momentum. The German forces, already depleted by the fighting around Kursk, were unable to mount an effective defense. By August 5, 1943, the Soviets had recaptured the city of Orel, forcing the Germans into a full retreat. The success of Operation Kutuzov marked the beginning of a broader Soviet advance that would continue to push the Germans westward. In the southern sector, the Soviets launched Operation Rumyantsev on August 3, 1943, targeting the German positions around the strategic cities of Belgorod and Kharkov. The Soviet offensive, conducted by the Voronezh and Steppe fronts, aimed to liberate these key cities and deliver a decisive blow to the German forces in the south. The fighting was intense, but the Soviets, buoyed by their success at Kursk and the influx of reinforcements, were able to overwhelm the German defences. Belgorod fell to the Soviets on August 5, 1943, just 2 days after the launch of the offensive. The battle for Kharkov was more protracted, with the Germans mounting a determined defence. However, by August 23, 1943, the Soviets had recaptured Kharkov, effectively ending the German summer offensive. The liberation of Kharkov marked the conclusion of the Battle of Kursk and the beginning of a continuous Soviet advance that would eventually take them to the gates of Berlin. The Battle of Kursk was a decisive Soviet victory, with far-reaching consequences for the rest of the war. The Germans suffered massive losses, with estimates of around 200,000 casualties and the destruction of over 1,000 tanks. The Soviet losses were also heavy, but their ability to replace both men and equipment far outstripped that of the Germans. For the Germans, Kursk marked the end of any realistic hopes of regaining the initiative on the Eastern Front. From this point on, the German forces would be on the defensive, steadily pushed back by the relentless Soviet advance. The significance of the Battle of Kursk cannot be overstated. It was the last major offensive the Germans would launch in the East, and its failure marked a turning point in the war. The Soviet Union had not only defended its territory, but had also demonstrated its growing military might and strategic acumen. The battle also highlighted the importance of intelligence, preparation, and the effective use. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of battle. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from around the world. Until next time, stay curious.